Hi, I'm Jason Marzek, Vice President, Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Agent Arts Latin America Center. Delighted to be here for this event with Senator Ben Cardin. I'd like to begin by introducing Executive Vice Chair of the Atlantic Council and founder of the Agent Arts Latin America Center. Frankly, the reason we're all here today, Adrian Arts, to provide some opening remarks. Adrian?
Welcome, good morning, buenos dias, and et cetera and so forth. Thanks for joining us all for this very special event. I'm delighted to welcome my dear friend, my senator, Ben Cardin, as we recognize his career, his leadership in foreign policy, and his vision for a secure and prosperous Western Hemisphere. Standing here today, I'm delighted to recognize not only an exceptional public servant, but also a trusted partner and friend, and as I said, my senator. I lived in the district for most of my life, and so it's really exciting to be able to say my senator. Senator Cardin's remarkable career speaks for itself. Since his election to the U.S. Senate in 2006, he has championed small businesses, environmental protection, and equitable economic opportunities across the Americas. What has always inspired me about Senator Cardin is his approach to foreign policy. And now, as chairman of the U.S. Senate Committee for Foreign Relations, that is particularly significant. He's been a steadfast advocate for transparency, accountability, and human rights in U.S. foreign policy. His ability to bridge divides and focus on what truly matters, the safety, dignity, and well-being of people, is extraordinary. His leadership has had a profound impact in the Americas. His role as the Democrat honorary co-chair of the Adrian Arts Latin America Center's U.S. Colombia Task Force since it was established in 2017 has been really significant. Together with his Republican counterpart, Senator Roy Blunt, at its founding, and now Senator Bill Hagerty, he's helped advance prosperity in Colombia across multiple U.S. and Colombian administrations, and we were discussing many Colombian administrations. Many of the members of the group are also here or tuning in virtually. So thank you to all of you for joining us. Over the years, this task force has published over 6 in-depth reports filled with key recommendations to strengthen U.S.-Colombia relations, a testament to his vision and commitment to the country and the region more broadly. Beyond his professional accomplishments, I want to highlight his passion for service. Whether advocating for Maryland's growing Latino population or fostering opportunities for underrepresented groups, the impact of his work is evident. Senator, as a fellow Marylander, and I almost brought my Maryland flag, I've seen firsthand how your work has positively impacted lives in our state and far beyond. You embody what public service is all about, and your efforts remind us of what it means to lead with purpose. Thank you, Senator. We also have someone who is not in Washington today, but wanted to thank you personally for this partnership. I'm delighted to introduce a video from our original Republican co-chair, the former Senator Roy Blunt.
One of the traditions of the Senate when I got there is you ask somebody from the other side to be your mentor. Ben Cardin and I had worked together in the House. We'd traveled together in the House. He turned out to be, for me, the perfect mentor to help me understand the Senate and understand relationships in the Senate. He was a master of both of those things. The chance we had at the Atlantic Council to work together on Colombia, an issue we both cared about, we'd worked on together in the House, again in the Senate, was a great example of Ben's leadership. If you want to take somebody who is a perfect combination of knowledgeable and filled with common sense, that's Ben Cardin, and we saw it over and over again in the Senate, at the Atlantic Council, in all of his public service.
And now, as a token of our appreciation, we'd like to present you with a gift that I think qualifies under all the rules, featuring Colombia's finest coffee and French press, a small gesture to honor the partnership you've built with the Adrian Arce Latin America Center, and to thank you for all you've done to deepen ties between the U.S. and the Americans. Thank you for your service, your friendship, and your vision.
Oh, wow. That's great. Thank
I'll
you.
just put that,
That's very nice.
and we'll have somebody. Let me go.
Just, Adrian, first of all, I want to thank you for your commitment to our hemisphere, but more importantly, your commitment to democratic values and to America's engagement. This task force was aimed at dealing with a long-standing conflict that was in Colombia, but I can tell you the Atlantic Council has been engaged, U.S. engagement globally for the right reasons to deal with world challenges, and you come up with concrete ways to address those types of issues by bringing different people together. So thank you for all of your work, and I know you have a plane to catch, so I understand when you have to leave. Jason, it's always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for your leadership here. And to Roy Blunt, you should know that Senator Blunt, when a new member comes in, they pick a mentor. It's usually someone of their same party. So when Roy picked me, it was an indication of the two of us committed to bipartisanship. And we're talking about foreign policy. We need to work in a very bipartisan manner. Now, I'm going to give some very brief remarks because I understand Jason wants to challenge me on my knowledge on the issues, which is fine. I'm going to challenge him as well. But let me just start by putting this in context. You all want to know what's going to happen with the transition between the Biden administration and the Trump administration. Now, it won't shock you that I think that President-elect Trump and President Biden have different styles on how they handle things. That's probably the understatement of the day. And I personally favor one of their styles over the other. But I think our foreign policy is rooted in America's bedrock principles and values. And I don't think that will change from one administration to another. And I want to just talk a little bit about that, because this has been the hallmark of our foreign policy endeavors. America believes in value-based foreign policy. We always have. And it's a testament to the commitment we have to democratic principles. Values mean that we are going to support human rights, we're going to support anti-corruption issues, we're going to support democratic institution strengthening. That's what we believe in. And we're willing to sacrifice immediate transactional issues in order to deal with our long-term goals and policies. And that's not always easy. And I must tell you that the contrast to that is what you see with autocratic regimes that use force and corruption for transactional gains. And we see that in Ukraine today, and we see it throughout the autocratic world. The best example I can give you that I'm personally engaged with, I was in London last week with the Global Magnitsky Justice Foundation, And one of the bills I'm the most proud about enacting was the Global Magnitsky versus the Sergei Magnitsky Accountability Act, and then the Global Magnitsky bill. And it's interesting, the path to get that passed was not necessarily that easy, because the State Department didn't particularly like Congress interfering with the way they do business. And they talked about, we have transactional issues with other countries. Do you really want us to be burdened by telling some of their people they can't come to the United States or they can't use our banking system? That makes it a little more complicated for us to get the trade agreement we want or the partnership we need at a particular international meeting. And we said that's the exact purpose of it, to make it clear that we're going to wrap our foreign policy in our values. And we were able to get that passed. It's now the global standard. 2 countries have passed Magnitsky-type sanctions. These are personal sanctions that do go against those that are violating other individuals' human rights or gross violations of corruption and those types of areas. And when I think about Colombia and I think about our hemisphere, our foreign policy has been based upon our values. And that's very true in Colombia with Plan Colombia and then Colombia Peace. Conflict that was brewing for over 50 years, over 200,000 people killed. And through U.S. engagement, we got to Peace Colombia. It hasn't been easy to implement all the terms, but Colombia is a democratic country that we want to strengthen their democratic principles. And I recognize that the current president, President Petro, has presented challenges for us, but it's a democratic state. We have to work these through. We have to deal with this within our values. So we'll be critical, but it doesn't change the direction. We have to have hope that Colombia will emerge as a very strong democratic state. And we have other challenges. Venezuela. I was pretty pleased to see the administration recognize the true elected leader. The Maduro regime does not have legitimacy. I've had several conversations with Maria Machado. She's an extremely brave individual, still in Colombia today, and still speaking out, even though her personal safety is very much at risk. Because the people of Venezuela have hope that they will return to a democratic state. It will happen. Haiti, close to a failed state. We're engaged in Haiti because we have hope for the Haitians that they will see a democratic government return to that island state, only 700 miles from our coast. And there's some bright spots. I was in Argentina this year for the 30th commemoration of the bombing of the Jewish Community Center. 30 years it took. But this year, in Argentina, the Supreme Court finally brought accountability to the perpetrators of that atrocity, Iran. They had hope, and it paid off. I was in Guatemala. We see now a new regime in Guatemala that's taking on the corruption of their society. There's hope there that with America's engagement, we can make these hopes a reality. So just to conclude on one of the great opportunities I've had in my lifetime. In 1987, I went through Checkpoint Charlie from West Berlin into East Berlin. I talked to East Berliners who wanted freedom. They had been fighting a long time. They had hope. 2 years later, I returned with a hammer in hand to help knock down the Berlin Wall. And today we see a vibrant Berlin united. We can never give up hope. We can never give up hope in our values and our democratic principles. Too many people in this world depend upon America's engagement of our foreign policy based upon our values. So it's been a real honor to chair the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, to represent the incredible citizens of Maryland in the United States Senate. I thank you all for giving me that opportunity. I've enjoyed my relationship with the council, and I know we're going to continue to find ways to work together to promote democracy in our hemisphere. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman, for those incredible comments. Not only your comments, but also as another fellow Marylander, for your leadership in our state and all that you've done over your nearly 60-year career in politics and policy, starting with the Maryland House and moving on from there. I also would like to, before I enter into a conversation with the chairman, also give my heartfelt thank you for all the collaboration we've worked on since 2017 when we started our U.S.-Colombia Task Force. Actually, for those in the room, you can look off to your side and you can see the number of reports that have Chairman Ben Cardin's name on it, that as honorary co-chair of the U.S.-Colombia Task Force or Advisory Group over the years, including our book center that we put out a couple years ago celebrating the bicentennial, in which you had a fantastic article. I also, just building off of Adrian's comments, want to thank you for the fact that when there are multiple crises around the world, including conflicts in Ukraine, the Middle East, increasing competition with China, your leadership in all of those issues, as well as your leadership to ensuring that Latin America and the Caribbean is not forgotten while all these other global crises are happening, is incredibly important. You mentioned Venezuela, Guatemala, Argentina, just some of your just recent trips to the region. I'm going to now, as the senator mentioned that he would ask me, grill me. I have a number of questions for the chairman as well, to talk a little bit more about Colombia, U.S.-Colombia relations, human rights, U.S. assistance, transnational criminal organizations, some of the issues that the senator has been so focused on over his career, and we'll be engaging that conversation until about 11:25. So, Senator, maybe picking up on your original comments, as you look back at your work, with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and as honorary co-chair of our U.S.-Colombia Advisory Group, what are some of the achievements, in addition to some of those that you just mentioned, that you're most proud of? And what do you hope for the next generation of leaders in our hemisphere?
Well, first of all, thank you for those comments. I am just so proud of the fact that we've been able to, as a bipartisan group in the Senate, promote human rights agenda, to promote value-based foreign policy. I mentioned the Magnitsky sanctions. I'm very proud that the Congress passed the Global Corruption Accountability Act that requires every mission, U.S. mission around the world, to have the capacity to evaluate corruption in the country in which they're representing the United States, to give us recommendations on how those countries can improve dealing with anti-corruption means, and to have consequences for those that fail to meet basic standards. To me, that's very important. Corruption is the fuel for autocratic regimes. It's the cancer in democratic societies, and we have to deal with it. So I was pleased to see that we made a major effort on that. I mentioned the Magnitsky sanctions. The Magnitsky sanctions were helpful in Guatemala. It's one of the reasons we were able to make changes in Guatemala. You can look country by country, the progress that we've made. The use of sanctions are very important. And it's been difficult to get sanctions agreed to by an administration. And we've had tremendous cooperation with the last two administrations on the imposition of sanctions. So I'm pleased about those issues as it relates to our own hemisphere here. So there are a lot of things that I am pleased that we were able to move forward. In Colombia, let me just point this out, because it is a little frustrating when we see the current language used by the president. I take great offense at his language, which I think borders on being anti-Semitic. I think his language in regards to the drug issues are not helpful in the region. But I, as talked a little bit earlier, I've seen the Colombians go from the Santos administration to the Duque administration, now to the Petro administration. No one can ever say that Colombia is not a vibrant democracy. They express themselves by their votes, and their will is carried out. And that gives me great hope that we'll be able to deal with these issues.
What are your thoughts, Senator, for the next generation of leaders that will be engaged in the hemisphere? What are some of your lessons learned insofar as what needs to be done moving forward to accelerate the opportunities for what we're so dedicated here to, opportunities for socioeconomic prosperity across the hemisphere?
Well, we sort of try to characterize, are they moving left or right? You know, and that's how we generally look at it, and we've seen trends move in both directions. I look at it a little differently. I look at it whether we have an honest regime, whether they respect their democratic institutions, whether they have a game plan to work in cooperation with their neighbors, and their relationship with the United States in the goals that we see for the hemisphere. And that can come from the left or right, and we have to be able to be flexible enough to understand that the will of the voters don't always match up with our politics here in Washington. So we got to be flexible. The danger in this world doesn't come from our hemisphere. The danger in this world comes from the informal coalition that's getting to be more formal between Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. And countries in our hemisphere, preference is to be with the West, to be with us. But if we aren't accommodating, if we don't have the economic tools to help them, if we don't have we don't give them the diplomatic support that they need, they're covering their bets. And that can work against our national security interests. So I think our legacy is to make sure in our hemisphere, America's there, U.S. is there, with the partnerships that are needed. Very important USAID, very important the economic tools in our hemisphere. China will offer deals in our hemisphere. They've offered deals. There's usually buyer's remorse afterwards, but the reason those deals were made is because we were not present. We have to be present.
And Senator, that's something that we're very focused on here, the issue of how do you better prioritize, invest, align, and engage in the hemisphere, specifically to counter things like malign Russian and Chinese influence that we see across the hemisphere. I want to pick up a little bit in a moment on corruption and global Magnitsky Act, which are so important to your career. But take us to Colombia first. And you spoke a little bit so far about how you see the relationship with Colombia. I'd like to ask you further, given your dedication and your leadership working so closely with the Atlantic Council over so many years on U.S.-Colombia ties, how do you see the current relationship? And also, you mentioned briefly the concerns about Colombia's position on global issues. So also, how do you see that alignment on issues such as Ukraine and Israel's right to protect itself, areas where there's been a high amount of divergence with Bogota?
Well, first, on the Middle East, we are very hopeful that we'll see a breakthrough in Lebanon. We need a breakthrough in the Middle East. We need some off-ramps there. And Israel lives in a very tough neighborhood. And Hamas' tragedy of October 7th ignited real security issues in the region. And the comments made by President Petro were not helpful at all, and made it more complicated for us in that relationship. Having said that, what we look to is figuring out ways that we can work together. As I said, we don't disagree with the need for economic improvements between our two countries. The United States has to expand investment in our hemisphere. Our investment tools are strong, but not strong enough. We have several tools that are currently being debated, bills in the Congress that would strengthen dramatically our ability to participate. We need to get them passed. Yeah. There's negotiations taking place as I am here on whether we can get a reform bill passed on financing. I just think we have to be much more aggressive. The Plan Colombia, the Peace Colombia is being implemented. It's the right plan. It involves accountability, hope, particularly for those that are in the rural areas. We got to deliver on that. And we have to encourage the leadership of Colombia to be more engaged with regional strategies than we think they are. Yeah. So we can do both. We can be gently criticizing what they're doing and still partner with them to achieve our objective with Peace Colombia.
And actually just last week, through our U.S.-Colombia Advisory Group that you're the honorary co-chair, we were pleased to put out our report on a path forward for Colombia's 2016 peace accord and lasting security. Security and counter-narcotics cooperation, that's also part of the bedrock of the relationship with Colombia. How do you assess that relationship, especially given some of the concerns around President Petro's approach to both of those issues?
We need to do much better. It's not just Colombia. I mean, we have to deal with the cartels. We can't be naive about the cartels, and you can't be nice about that.
Yeah.
We need help in Mexico. We need to deal with border issues, and we have to deal with alternate economic opportunities. That was part of the Plan Colombia. We really need to match the economic prosperity through legal economies rather than through the illicit drug act, and we haven't done that yet. So,
You know, Senator, I want to make sure that you also have if you want to switch the conversation, ask me questions, you're welcome to. I'm just joking.
So where did you get your coffee from?
Actually, I haven't had my coffee yet today. But I want to ask you about the Global Magnitsky Act, and which is you mentioned has become a global standard. You mentioned your comments at the outset, something that you're most proud of throughout your career in Congress. And I think everybody in this room and watching us online would concur that it's become quite a powerful tool for holding human rights violators accountable worldwide. And frankly, that's a testament to you and your achievements, because that would not have been possible without your leadership. From your perspective, how is this what would be some of the advice you would give future policymakers on balancing human rights advocacy with diplomatic and trade interests, and how this legislation could potentially further shape U.S. policy moving forward?
Right, and a couple points here. First, you never have to worry about an imbalance in favor of human rights, because the other side will always have an advantage. So whatever we can do to advance human rights, we should do to advance human rights. Secondly, Congress needs to initiate. You're not going to get the initiatives from the executive branch. So the legislature becomes extremely important in advancing human rights. Third, you need to work bipartisan. My first partner was Dick Lugar. I was a freshman member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He was ranking Republican on the committee, and he helped me get the vote on the Sergei Magnitsky Accountability Act, and was my first partner. My second partner was John McCain, who helped me get the Global Magnitsky into the National Defense Authorization Act. The first Sergei Magnitsky was put into the normal trade relations with Russia, so the must-pass bill. The Global Magnitsky went into the National Defense Authorization Act. At the time, John McCain was either chair or ranking member of that committee, and he was my true partner in getting that enacted. And then the permanency of the Global Magnitsky, we got that again in the National Defense Authorization Act, and Senator Wicker was my partner. So I've always had Republican colleagues that have worked with me on the human rights issues. And right now, working on the International Protection Defenders Act of Human Rights Defenders, Senator Wicker is my partner. In the corruption, it was Senator Young who was my partner. So you need Republicans to work with you in order to get these bills done. And then third, or fourth, whatever number I'm up to, you got to be patient on these things. It takes some time to get this done. And if we act, other countries will follow. So the Magnitsky philosophy was the first for its time, individual sanctions versus country sanctions. We know when Russia invaded Ukraine, we imposed sanctions on Russia. But when you have autocrats creating human rights violations, or when you see who murdered Sergei Magnitsky, imposing individual sanctions hurt, because that individual can't travel to the United States. They can't use a banking system, which means basically they can't use any banking system, because the US banking system is the standard. So when President Putin met with President Trump in their first meeting, the first thing that President Putin said, can we get rid of these Magnitsky sanctions? Because his support network depended upon corruption, and he needed their income. So it works. And over 24 countries have now passed Magnitsky-type sanctions. We've got to coordinate that better. The United States has imposed about 650 individual people have been sanctioned under Magnitsky. I think it was like 65 this year alone. So it's working. It gets attention. It is now the global standard. So we need to do this. We did that originally on trafficking in persons. We led, and that we developed a national standard on that. We have to do that in corruption. We haven't done it yet. Corruption is a core national concern, President Biden's statement on that. We need to develop, as I hope the next Congress will push this issue on the global stage to get anti-corruption and enforcement of anti-corruption as a more coordinated effort among the democratic countries of the world. And we can't stop there. There's going to be a lot of other issues that we're going to have to deal with. That the freedom of press is something that is today extremely dangerous. I think it's the most dangerous profession in the world today is being a reporter. We have to stand up for that. We have to defend human rights defenders. They are at risk. We saw that in so many countries around the world, so many political prisoners. We got to work to get these political prisoners released. I've been able to do, by leveraging the power I have as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, to get major progress made in countries such as Egypt and others that are releasing prisoners today. There's ways that you can use the leverage of Congress to advance human rights, and I hope that those that in the next Congress and pursuing Congresses will use the tools that they have to help individuals as well as policies that make this world a better place for all.
Well, your words and your leadership are a guide for those that come into in the next Congress. Political prisoners, of course, Venezuela, that brought up 2,000 political prisoners after the election, a couple hundred released, but still nearly 2,000 that remain in Venezuelan children as well, right, that remain in Venezuelan prisons after the election. You mentioned corruption and the importance of addressing corruption, which also undermines security, it undermines governance around the world and specifically in our hemisphere as well. What do you think, if you had your wish, of policies or initiatives that could be advanced to most effectively address the pervasive scourge of corruption that we see, whether it's in the hemisphere or globally, and also the importance of bipartisanship to be able to do so?
There's a model out there for what we should do, and it's called the Trafficking in Persons Report. We should do a similar type of disclosure in regards to anti-corruption measures or corruption issues. Every country in the world has issues in trafficking, including the United States. Every country in the world have issues with corruption. Now, there are many countries that it's part of their system, and it is affecting their governance directly. There's other countries, such as ours, where it just takes wealth away and something we have to deal with. So in trafficking in persons, we point out what every country can do more. We point out the proper standards for how you deal as an originating, a destination, or transport country. We need to do the same on anti-corruption. What are those standards for public officials on bribery? What type of transparency do you have? How you have an independent judiciary? How you finance an independent judiciary? These are all issues that need to be part of your system. We need to broadcast that and judge every country in the world based upon those universal standards, not American standards, universal standards for anti-corruption. We took the first step on legislation that I was able to get passed last year, and that is this corruption reporting. We now have the capacity within our embassies to do this. We have some reporting, but not global reporting, and we have the potential of consequences, but no mandatory sanctions. So it's a first step, but name and shame is an important thing. Magnitsky is name and shame.
Yeah.
Trafficking in persons is name and shame. Believe me, when representatives of other countries come into my office and they see the tip report on my desk, they know what to expect. We need the same thing on corruption,
Yeah.
so that countries are embarrassed by the fact that they don't have a bribery statute in place that's effective. You know, I'm very much a supporter of President Zelensky and his efforts in Ukraine, but one of the untold stories is how he's crusade against corruption in his own country. Ukraine was a country that was embedded with corruption, and President Zelensky has taken steps to change that.
Yeah.
That needs to be known, because you can be an effective leader. You can be a strong leader. You don't need corruption.
Important to celebrate anti-corruption initiatives as well as highlight those who are engaging in those practices to have betterment of those policies. Corruption also helps to foster the rise of transnational criminal organizations across the hemisphere, which pose significant threats to stability. Some of the work that we'll be more engaged on going into 2025 here at the Atlantic Council, because this is undermining so much of the achievements that we're seeking to advance across the hemisphere. From your perspective, what are some of the steps that can be taken between the U.S. and governments across the region to address some of these threats? We've had conversations here with then Commander of U.S. Southern Command General Richardson, who's spoken quite significantly about the threat that TCOs pose. So, what more can be done? We're helping countries, but and also how to do so on a bipartisan basis.
Well, I think there is bipartisan recognition that transnational criminal organizations are a threat to our national security. We see that in our own hemisphere in the narco trafficking and human trafficking, migrants particularly. It's one thing you could do is have reasonable laws. If we had better immigration laws, we wouldn't have the type of incentives for the trafficking of migrants to our country. So there's some responsibility that we have to give openings to transnational organizations, criminal organizations, when we don't have the right laws and people don't have hope and they turn to transnational organizations for what they want and they're fueling corruption. Same thing was true in Colombia, when you had, in the rural communities, they had no other opportunity than to grow the coca crops. So that's, yeah, you need to have alternatives to, so people are not trapped by transnational criminal organizations. And then you have to have regional enforcement. You can't, it's hard for a country when you're dealing with transnational to do it on its own. So you need to have regional cooperation. And that means you have to have laws that allow that enforcement across border lines, which is one of the issues, of course, we're running into challenges in our own hemisphere on.
So, Senator, I know we have you have to get back for a vote. So I want to ask you a quick last question. It's maybe not such a quick answer, but I'll have a concise answer here. As you think about the next Congress, and as you're preparing to depart Congress after so many years of incredible service, what's your advice for how to make the Senate work even better?
First of all, I'm not going to miss the nomination hearings in the next. You know, as I was saying earlier, the Senate's a great institution. It has an incredible history in our nation and doing so many important things in the balance of power. I really do hope that they avoid the temptation of giving up their checks and balances on the executive branch. To me, the nomination process, advise and consent, is extremely important. A lot comes out during that process. And if President Trump gets his way in short-circuiting by recess appointments, that would be disastrous. So I hope that does not happen. Secondly, I think each senator has incredible opportunities. You don't have to use that arbitrary power of hold. The hold was there for a purpose of delay so you could read a bill. It shouldn't be used for a kill. And there should be a way of circumventing individual holds. I've experienced in the Senate that there's a half a dozen senators that use the hold routinely, almost daily, and that's an abuse of power and should not be done. And then lastly, I hope we can get to open debate on the Senate floor, more amendments, more debate. I've talked to our leaders about that, and less need for filibuster cloture votes. We're going to be spending, if you want to enjoy being in our gallery tonight, we'll be in session until about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning because of the delays in confirming judges. Now, Senator Schumer is not blameless on this. We should have taken up some of these judges at an earlier stage in this Congress. But the Republicans are shameless in the number of filibuster proposals requiring cloture and the time that's going to take on every judge that we take up. So it's the abuse of the use of cloture and it's the abuse of individual members that need to be addressed. I do think elections have consequences. I do believe the majority should be able to move an agenda. And there should be an opportunity for the minority to be able to get input and time to debate those issues. And I hope that the 119th Congress can figure that out. I'll be watching from the comfort of my home.
Well,
And let me thank you all very much for everything.
thank you very much, Senator. Thank you very much.
Quiero que aunque norte y sur sean distintos, lleven un mismo latido en el ritmo, como quien comparte el mismo apellido, porque al fin y al cabo son